All right, welcome everyone. Yes, my name is Kevin Kurbis. I'm with the AgriHub Group of Companies. I'm the National Solutions Director, focused on the hog sector. I've been in this industry since back in the 90s with a focus on equipment, and yeah, probably late 90s, early 2000s is when the buzz really started happening over in Europe about loose housing that was coming, and kind of caught my attention and got a little look at it at that point, and really loose housing has been a huge part of my career ever since. So multiple decades here of focusing on that, as well as other things in the barn, but it's certainly been one of the things that I've put a highlight on. So this presentation here is going to be based on a lot of real world experience, things I've seen from around the world, different types of equipment that are used in loose housing, successes, failures. Also, at the same time, I don't quote a whole lot of scientific information in here, even though I'm well aware there's lots of papers out there and research done, and I've certainly gone through those and read them. But there's going to be more of a my experience kind of take on it rather than trying to present it with a lot of the actual numbers out of some research. So. Um, Anyway, what we're going to focus on here is the importance of the design and the fact that realistically, even though I've been in the equipment space pretty much my entire career, the equipment comes after that, right? We're looking to make sure that the design actually is proper for the pigs and get ourselves the best, as the title here shows, the social network, right? We need to design those pens for harmony and not havoc, right? So just to play on this nice little AI generated screenshot here, Sally Sal heading off into group housing. The reality is, I guess our pigs aren't going to make friend requests. They're just going to push and shove when it comes to things. So we'll work right past that and jump into the presentation here. So why does this matter, right? Why are we doing this? It's to make sure everybody understands and focuses on the fact that it's not just the layout, right? We're going to talk a lot about the design and the layout of a pen, right? But it's actually the outcome that matters, right? What are we looking to actually achieve, right? So we need to understand that sow behavior has a direct impact on welfare and production, right? The two are so closely tied together, they should really never be separated. Welfare and production are always tied together, in my opinion. If you've got healthy pigs, your production's better, and you just simply cannot achieve good production if you're not taking care of those animals, right? So we also need to remember group housing's not a one size fits all. And that could be a play on words in a lot of different ways, but it is just basically to say that, what might work one place is not for sure the exact same thing to work at the next place. I've seen the loose housing results and affected by climate, management, genetics, feed. They're all important factors that we need to keep in mind as well, not to say, okay, what works for one works for all, but again, focused on that outcome, right? And designing with the behavior in mind, right, the animal behavior, it leads to harmony, not havoc. And we're going to, come back to that title a few times here. But starting with that, the behavior of the pigs, rather than, maybe a focus on again, the equipment or the penning style, that should be following, not leading the discussion, right? Now, as much as I just said, I don't use a whole lot of science. This is some stuff here, some data that's adapted from a report that came out a few years ago. And basically, just to highlight the fact that with the aggression at mixing, one of the key times for aggression, right? Those interactions of aggression can come down significantly, right, as we increase the space per sow. Now that shows some going up to 3 square meters per sow, which honestly I don't believe any of us are going to do, but you can see that it does continue to have an impact the more space we give each animal, and we'll get more into that later. The other side of this chart here as well is showing that you know the type of feeding can also have an effect on body condition and aggression, right? Something competitive floor feeding, for example, versus ESF, right? We can really look at our body condition scoring and aggression scores actually having an effect there. So just a quick reference to get that planted in the back of your mind that space and style do actually have an actual impact that's been found even through research. So the first thing we need to do is actually understand the social behavior of sows, right? And if we take a look at this infographic here, basically just something to lay out and show that each sow has their own kind of bubble, right? That they want to keep and not overlap. They want to keep their distance from other ones that they don't know. And if that overlap happens, right, then that's when we can get some of those conflict and aggression things, right? So this, what we have to look at is in normal, naturally out in the wild, they will form small stable groups, right? This is led to lots of times in our barns to a misconception about what the best design would be, right? That doesn't mean that putting in a small group in a pen is actually best. We need to remember that actually what they're doing is voluntarily forming a small family unit, but in a much larger world, right? That's what's actually happening. So this misconception that small stable groups are the best solution is actually a bit of a misnomer for what actually happens and translates to reality through behavior. We want to make sure that we're using our space and the distance to manage the conflict, right? So we have to first understand how a sow will resolve any conflict or fight, right? If they come at each other and they start going head to head, shoulder to shoulder there, when one is ready to give up and says, okay, you're the boss and I get it, she'll turn and run the opposite direction. And what they found is they have to be able to run, 30 feet or 10 meters in a straight distance or get into a hiding spot for the aggressor sow to actually acknowledge and admit that the other one is giving up, right? The one giving up knows that she is, but the other one to actually get that settled into their routine and in their head needs to actually say, you know what, we've run for far enough, or I've lost you around a corner, right? And next time they meet, they'll understand that and remember that. But we need to give it a way to actually be resolved. If we don't give enough space, it's just going to keep going and going until there's damage to the less dominant sow, right? And again, coming back to the aggression is always going to be most intense at mixing in a group. Second is feeding time. But when we're putting new animals in together and they're establishing their hierarchy, that's when it's going to be most aggressive. So we have to find ways to make sure we deal with that. So what are our challenges in group housing? Well, first and foremost, when we have that aggression at mixing, that's going to lead to some injuries or potential lameness, right? And that's going to happen to and because of the sows that are just coming into the pen. It's not really the ones that are in a pen already. If you have a larger pen, larger dynamic setup, so that means that it's either all the animals if you're doing a small static, or just the ones coming in. And either way, it's an equivalent thing, right? So again, just something to get out of your head as far as how that works. It's actually the animals coming into the pen that are the ones, not the ones that are already established and protecting their space. That's what a lot of people assume. But it's if you mark those animals and have a look when they go in, it's always the ones that you just put into the pen that are causing the issue or getting anything wrong with them, right? So we also have to know that the feed competition is what's going to lead to your stress and the poor intake, right? That hey, that goes all the way back to why did we put crates in the first place, right? We wanted individual feeding and care, and we wanted to eliminate that feed competition. So you take away the stress of having to fight for feed, and you've actually got rid of the majority of the reason that they're ever going to fight anyway, right? So that's something to make sure we're keeping in mind when we're designing in for a group. Now our space issues, going to lead to bullying, hiding, wasted resources. There's a lot of negatives to that, right? Either animals are getting beat up, being timid, and not being able to take full advantage of being in that group, or we're just plain old wasting resources, wasted feed, wasted space, things like that, right? So this picture here shows a very simple and actually looks like a nice pen, but in reality, we've really got nothing addressed in here, right? It's got some animals laying there, and you can see where we're going to feed them. But if there was a sow that was going to be an aggressor, there's nowhere for the timid one to actually hide or get away from. The pen's not big enough to run that 30 feet, 10 meters like we had talked about. There's no corners to go around and hide from her. So you could end up with some really ugly situations. And once it's established, it can look fine like it does in this picture. But the reality is it makes a lot of hot zones where one's trying to lay, another one's dunging, where one's walking, another one is trying to lay down. It can turn into a mess pretty quick and takes a different style and much more manual management in this style of a system, right? So there's nothing to address anything behavioral into this, right? We're just putting feed in a pen and really it's hoping for the best and managing it that way, right? So what does harmony look like, right? Well, I chose this picture. This is a picture I actually got several years ago in a farm in Australia. But I think it just actually encapsulates exactly what we're always shooting for, right? And this picture will come up again later. But for right now, we just want to have a look at that and go, if we've got a bunch of animals that are just laying around the majority of the day, that's really, we've achieved our goal, right? So we want to make sure we have something where we can manage or mitigate the aggression at mixing. We're never really going to fully eliminate it, right? The goal here is predictable, managed, low stress mixing, right? No aggression or perfection is kind of unrealistic, and we shouldn't set our goals for that. We want to make sure we can actually achieve what we're shooting for and make it as best as possible. Now, the stable hierarchies and clear definition of zones, that happens only when they're given the proper space, the amount and type, right? We have to make sure that they have places to go and do the things they want to do, be it eating, laying down, travel, play, dunging. They're kind of divided a little bit, but there's the three main ones of eating, dunging, and lying, and then the travel zones in between. So they're able to establish those stable hierarchies, basically, so those family units within a big group, and then use the zones properly. That's when you're going to get that harmony, right? And we're just basically making sure when it's good, all the sows can rest, eat, and move without fear. When we've got that achieved, you've got girls that are just gonna lay around and sort themselves out, right? So the key design principles, right? Number one, we're gonna give sows choice and control. Put that back in there. And when I say choice, it's choice of when to eat and where to sleep. Those are the two big ones, right? And if they have choice and control over that, they will sort that out. But again, need to be given, the areas to allow that. And we want to create a flow, not obstacles, right? We're only using penning to guide them. We're not really using it to obstruct or contain them, right? We're going to even use shorter penning dividers inside that pen just to give, dividers, physical dividers without actually containment. The only containment really happens around the perimeter of any pen. Internally, we're letting them move around and use that space as they want. So we're using that to create flow and guide that traffic, not necessarily just keep them into one area, right? So we also want to balance our visibility and barriers. That's why I talked about some of that lower penning. You want to be able to see across that pen. I have no desire to actually go into a barn and look at your concrete or spindle penning. I actually want to see the pigs, right? That's telling us what's going on, and the same for them. But there's places where we do want those barriers, right? We have to understand and know where we're using solid penning versus spindle or short penning, and then also know and understand the effect that would have on other factors, sight lines, ventilation, those kind of things. So that all has to be factored in of size and style that we want to go there, right? And then again, understanding those three zones of eating, sleeping, and dunging being the main ones, right? And then we have the travel zones or paths between those. We have to design for that function, not just square footage. Just saying, hey, I have enough space in this pen is kind of irrelevant if it hasn't been clearly designated and allocated in the way we want it to be used. So let's talk space, and I don't mean the Muppet Show, if all you remember the pigs in space, right? That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about how much and what we got in the pen, right? And it isn't just about how much, but how it's used, right? For example, their Prop 12 clearly told us, you have to use X amount of space, but there was no focus on how it was to be used. There was no information or guidance on why that amount of space was required. And that's a mistake. If you have that proper amount of space but not used in the proper way, it's going to be an issue, right? So too much in any area, if you define your laying areas too much, then you're going to have problems in your travel areas because they get too narrow. If you put too much into your travel areas, you don't have enough lane areas, those are going to get messy, right? So you can get all kinds of issues, dirty sleeping areas, slippery walking areas, aggression for travel or possession of the eating space. So you really, really have to understand how much is required in each area, right? And we also have to allow those escape routes and hiding places, right? And this is back to that 30 feet or 10 meters or the corner to escape behind. We have to understand that. And we have to make sure we're designing that. Obviously, a pen that's 20 feet across has absolutely no chance of giving us that space for them to run in a 30-foot line. And that's why the larger pens have an advantage right there. Is just the smaller ones cannot actually check that box, right? We need our loiter free zones, right? So some areas need to be kept clear to allow movement, be that exit of a feeding area, or other spots where we want them to be traveling to waters clearly. So this can be done through environmental designs or physical add-ins, anti-lay down devices and such. But a large thing that we can do as well is just simply make sure we're designing that travel pattern itself and that behavior is actually what's keeping it from being a comfortable area to sit down and spend extra time in, right? So we can achieve that in a lot of different ways, but we need to be aware of it. And we also have to, on the flip side of that, go, well, where they're resting is not necessarily equal to a traffic jam. If we're doing it right, then just because they're stopping and there's no way around, it's not a problem if that's where we want them to be. But if it is someplace where we wanted them to travel, it is going to be an issue, right? So we have to remember that the focus is to provide a quality, stress-free eating and resting areas, right? And then this takes away the competition, lowers aggression, right? These are all tied directly to injuries. Again, tied back to production. So it's one equals the other, and we have to be aware of that. So what are our social stress points in there? Again, we're coming back to the mixing time is equal to our maximum risk. This is the time where if we don't do it right, we're going to be creating some problems, right? Entry and exit to those feeding areas, how they access that and how they get away from it is critical, because that is the point where they're going to fight for possession of a space, right? And narrow passages or dead ends are just a no-go, right? We want to make sure we're not designing anything there where an animal can get trapped. And all of these are very predictable and therefore avoidable because we know they exist and we just have to design around them, right? Same thing with an inadequate escape space. I've highlighted before, I'm coming back to it, that if they don't have that space to get away, it's going to create a problem that never ends till an animal is down or injured. So we need those escape routes and physical barriers that we had talked about, right? So this is why the sows need to avoid, not confront. That's back to nature. They don't really want to confront to keep the space they have. They'll spread out and avoid each other, and we want to enable and allow that. Right? Physical barriers, we want to reduce that stalking or aggression behavior. Again, this is one where we have to be careful. We don't want to block off any ventilation or other stuff, but a wide open space will allow a dominant sow to just continuously chase. And I've seen plenty of examples of this, even one here in Manitoba where smaller pen, and I was just watching what was going on, and really the only escape became that the timid sow could go and hide in the feed station. They had an ESF system there, but because she wasn't getting fed in there, eventually the gates would open and the more dominant one would chase her right back out, and it just became a all day chasing her around. And at that point, in that small pen, unfortunately, all you can do is get that aggressor out of that pen, because she's just going to continue to cause problems. So that's why we need those physical barriers and allow somewhere to escape to. And then we also use islands, I guess, for lack of a better word. They can calm down these hot zones, right? If we basically break it out with some penning and create those nesting spaces or areas, we can utilize those visuals and visual blockers and make sure we calm it down, right? So the penning dividers are important. Use this as an example. We're bringing up that picture of the pen from earlier where really there's nothing inside here to create a designator or a space. But in this farm, all the animals can come and lay in these areas, and travel can still happen up and down here. And even if something happens that something chases, they're only going to do a small loop inside here. They can't get past here, so it's not an open and free place to run. And that's how we can calm down a lot of those hot zones, as we talked about, getting rid of that aggression. So we have to consider our feed system design. Again, this is probably one of the biggest things in group housing, right? We let them out into a pen. What causes aggression, what causes poor production, kind of led together in the fact that they need to be fed individually or they'll be out of condition when fighting for feed, right? So the feeding is always the flashpoint for fights. Feed comes down into any one of these systems and the other animals are aware of it. They'll hear it, sense it, smell it. They will come to that and they will fight for possession of that feeding. So we need to make sure we understand that's something we need to deal with, right? So some of the designs that are commonly available are floor feeding, stanchion or shoulder stalls, and realistically, I didn't list it, but I lump free access stalls right into that same category. They just provide slightly longer protection areas, but the feeding style is the same as far as how they operate. Trickle feeding, which is really not used a whole lot, it would be in conjunction with the stanchion or shoulder stalls, but it's a very expensive feed delivery. People tend to do just a dump of feed, which honestly leads to a little bit more aggression, but they're just typically not willing to spend that extra money on the feed dispensing to make it a true trickle feeding system, or ESF electronic sow feeding. Those are essentially your choices when working with this, right? And one of the main goals, right, is to protect those timid sows at feeding. This is a welfare and production issue, right? Feed access equity is absolutely key. If those timid sows can't get to feed properly, they're just going to fall off. If somebody else is stealing their feed, they're going to get too fat, and you're just going to have production issues and welfare issues like crazy. You just will not resolve them, right? So a bit of a chart, just saying, okay, what do these provide or whatever? We want to make sure that we're giving that individual feed access, right? That they can actually get to it individually. We want to protect them while they're eating. We want to control the ration. Back to precision feeding or individual sow rations, we need to control that. We need to look at, is it a low aggression risk? And how's the freedom of movement, cleanliness, visual, and hey, even the flexibility of can I work with it how I want? And as you can see here, as you go down the chart, the walkthrough ESF is the only one that actually checks all the boxes, right? The backout ESF comes real close, but unfortunately only gets halfway there, kind of on the low aggression, because you've got a point right at that entry exit is actually the same thing. So any animal wanting to exit the feeding area is basically fighting with another animal that's trying to enter, right? So that drives up the aggression, doesn't eliminate it. Whereas the walkthrough ESF, at least you can separate the exit from the entrance and make sure those animals are not mixing. And then also in the layout flexibility, it still becomes something that you have to kind of just put on one side or in the corner, and you can't really control the flow as well as you can with the others, right? Some of the other ones certainly, get you a good ways there. Not that they can't work, but the only one that fully checks all the boxes is to go to a full ESF. So managing the feed order is understanding that the dominance determines the order. We're not going to change that. We're not going to control that, right? But that should not dictate access, right? So a more dominant sow is going to eat first. In a competitive system, that means they might actually eat first and more than what they were allocated. They might be stealing food from others. In a non-competitive system, then it just means they're going to be the first ones eating, but after they eat, there is time and the other ones have to wait, but they'll get their full portion. So dominance only determines the order. It shouldn't actually have an effect on the access, right? And you also have to remember, one aggressive sow can ruin the system. If you have, like that open pen we already looked at there, if there was one sow that wanted to be the boss of everyone, she's going to make a complete mess in there. She's going to be attacking everyone. She's going to be stealing feed from others. It's going to make a mess. In that system, in anything competitive like that, there's no choice but to remove her from the system, right? In a non-competitive, at least she can be controlled, contained, and usually trained out of that bad habit, because we don't reward them. They can for the start part of the pen, they in the group, they might actually do some pretty wacky stuff to try to get feed. But as they realize they don't, that behavior tends to be trained out of them, right? And then what's absolutely critical here is actually, again, the flow, right? So moving the ones that have eaten away from the ones that are waiting to eat really, really helps in reducing aggression. And then you can actually see in this type of an example, these are both just diagrams of a larger ESF pen. But in this one, you've basically got an animal that can come in, go straight out and hit another ESF. Ones that have eaten are always mixing with ones that waiting to eat, and they'll only head to this area when they're bored or really tired for the day, right? Whereas in this one, we control the axis by saying, okay, these animals are coming into the feed stations here, and when they exit, they can't get right back there. They have to do this whole loop around. And when they have to do that whole loop around, however long it is, it basically gives time for another sow to actually enter, access, and eat, right? Again, once they do that whole loop and get no reward, that behavior gets trained out of them as well anyway over time. Now, the other advantage that has is when we are using those flow, we can actually add management tools such as a sow weigher, separation, painting, loss tag identification, separation, heat detection. There's a lot of things management-wise that we can add to the system effectively and efficiently when we do that. So it's actually more than just feeding at that point. It really becomes a management tool that really helps with welfare and production as well. So again, keep in mind, using that penning to manage the flow, right? We're not just looking to throw them in a box. We are looking to make sure they're moving around the way we want them to. So our functional zoning in pens, right? We can typically control stuff as far as eating, right? We need to designate these clear zones for eating, resting, dunging, as I've highlighted before. And we can control where they eat simply due to how we deliver the feed. Are we dropping it on the floor in a specific place? Are we putting it in a trough? Are we using an electronic sow feeder? That one's pretty easy. The rest need to be really thought out and then also include environmental factors such as ventilation, right? I've seen plenty of situations where an outside wall on a building, whether it has fans or windows or even if it doesn't, the temperature differences from summer to winter will actually change how those areas get used. So colder climate like I'm in, you'll really see in winter where those areas will get cool and drafty, and then they start to get full of manure and get to be a mess. Whereas flip side in the summer, that's where they want to be, right? So it can flip back and forth depending on the season. And you got to make sure that you're actually designing for that. Are they going to be laying there or are they not? Can you designate it as a travel area? These are things to remember on the building side of it as well, construction side, that you usually don't have much control over, right? And don't let these zones overlap by accident. It's a very common mistake, right? People will put water access too close to a laying nest. That's going to make a dunging area out of it, right? They're maybe not providing protective barriers, but we have to allow that traffic to this, to go without disrupting the laying areas, right? And we have to remember that these sows, if you do it right and designate those zones, the sows are going to self-organize. They're going to get in where they need to be. And, I guess they don't really need that urban planner to tell them where to go at that point if we've already laid it out. Rest matters. I had to include this simply because there's plenty of scientific literature showing that increased rest time is associated with lower cortisol levels, right? That'll indicate lower stress. Okay, then lower stress has been linked to improved reproductive outcomes, such as better return to estrus rates, farrowing rates, piglet survival rates, etc. So lowering that stress is always a good thing, welfare and production-wise. And disturbed rest is going to lead to lower productivity simply because it's a higher stress, right? So we really, really want to make sure that we're giving them a proper and allow an undisturbed rest is really what we're after, right? And again, you're laying where the low status sows, they're going to suffer first, right? So the weaker in the herd are going to be ones who really pay for it if you don't get this right. We want to make sure that we can provide them some quiet, low traffic corners to get that quality rest. This is very key, right? And I bring back this picture again because I think it shows it perfectly. right? We've got areas where we've made the low traffic. Animals aren't just walking through it here at all times. And these animals are out. Like, I love the look on this girl's face. She's completely content and she's out. But if you look, this one who's spilled out, it's not that there wasn't room for her here, but she's over there and her ears are still up. She may be laying down, but she's not actually resting. And that was one of the things when I grabbed this picture that I really came to realize this is absolutely encapsulation of what you can do and what is also natural. This will happen. She's in a lot of ways face out. She's protecting her friends, right? She's going to be one of the more dominant ones, and she's taking her watch to go, if anybody's coming up, I'm going to see them first while the rest of them have a nice sleep, right? So it can really be done without too much complication. And even in here, you can see solid versus slat, right? In this situation, we used both because that was a refit and that's what a retrofit, and that's what they had. So that's what we worked with, and it can be done. Now we also have to talk about enrichment. So what is it, right? Why does it work? It keeps their minds busy and reduces tension. That's plenty of research behind these again, right? So toys are not just equal to chains. We need to rotate and vary. They will get bored of the same thing. Again, more and more research. Someone at the Prairie Swine Center here recently at the last Banff Pork, just showing how much difference that can make in stress levels and how key it is to be rotating the type of toys out as well, right? And don't place enrichment where it causes traffic jams, right? If you're going to stop and play with it, you want to make sure it's an area that they're not blocking from anything else, feed, water, anything like that, right? If we don't do that enrichment with purpose, it's just going to create more frustration than it actually solves, right? So we need to know what kind and where it is and make sure we're paying attention to that. So here we're going to walk through a real world example. This is what I would consider a very good pen design, right? It's spacious and it's well zoned. I've color coded, basically showing what each area would be used for, right? We have central enrichment and we've made sure it's not in the traffic lanes, right? The animals are going to exit from a feed station here and they have all the space to walk around as they want to access either the laying nest, which is protected again from the travel, or they can come off to the side here and play with the enrichment without actually interfering with anybody else. It's not in the traffic, and that's key. And then the calm mixing with predictable routines, that's some management stuff that we can work with. That, for example, we would advise that in the morning when most of the other animals have already eaten and things are calm, any animals getting introduced to the pen get introduced into this area. So the first thing they do is enter the feed station, get a portion of feed, and then exit one at a time with a full belly. A lot of guys would either open a gate here or here and just let the group in because they will figure it out. But what happened in those situations, once the sows are actually in pens, and now we've taken them over to the farrow and they've been there 3-4 weeks plus the breeding, so it's been over a month since they've been in the pen. You open that up and they see this, they go for a run. They remember it and they're like, yeah, let's go. And they start charging down here, and whoops, when we get to the end and try to make a corner, that's when you'll get some bunching up, banging into each other, going down and creating, leg and shoulder injuries. And obviously that is exactly what we're trying to avoid. So sometimes the injuries we see in these pens are not actually related to aggression, but it is to do with how we're mixing and how we're managing those animals. Now we go to what would be a problem pen, right? Here we basically have to see that it's a wide open pen. We've still got very spacious, but not zoned, right? It's wide open. I got a pen here that's designed for smaller animals at 21 square feet and larger animals at 24 square feet. It's not that we don't have enough space. It's just not really zoned, right? We have a narrow feeding zone, which is always going to be blocking, right? It doesn't matter. We're off in the corner here, and all it takes is one animal laying here, nobody else can access. Maybe even feed an animal sitting in the feed station, that's again blocking access. And it's really the same over here. We've tripled them, and even if there's only one standing here and here, that middle one's very hard to access. In these kind of situations, we actually notice this middle feed station does not get used the same as the two outside ones, just because it's harder to get to. And there's no escape spaces, right? This is back to the round and round and round. Even if I put up a couple of walls here, all I've done anywhere in this pen is create a problem, because I can't actually put my enrichment anywhere properly, right? It's only going to block either the traffic or the resting area. So I struggle, and everyone will, with trying to designate, even though I've got the proper square foot per sow, how do I designate travel lane, enrichment, dunging, and eating areas into this without causing overlap? And it's basically impossible to do. So mistakes to avoid, overcrowding, lack of escape routes, poor layout. A lot of different things can make it a layout, a poor layout, and inadequate enrichment. These are all things that we've already touched on, right? But guys will also go in and they'll design for max head count and not behavior. And that's like probably the most common mistake I see people do is try to either max head count for the actual space, overcrowding is what that leads to. But also in times where you're putting too many pigs per the type of equipment, be it an ESF or whatever form you have, if you have too many and not think of the behavior, it's going to really create a problem, right? If they ignore the entry and exit flow from any place, that's going to be an issue as well, right? Cause traffic jams with two-way traffic. And thinking aggression is normal. That's not really normal, right? And then it allows people to go, it happens. What are you going to do? We can definitely be controlling that or mitigating that. So what's the best setup? Well, almost any system can work, but the reality is large pens, they make flow and zones easier to design and manage. So larger pen actually is better for these animals. And if you're incorporating equipment such as an electronic sow feeder, that offers controlled feeding, space efficiency, and monitoring and sorting options, right? A lot of things that you can get from an ESF. So we can check a lot of boxes here to do what we need to do once we've actually got to that point. So where are we at? The ideal social network. We want to follow this path to success and say, okay, minimize that aggression, feed them during or protect during the feeding, give them escape options, and you can hit that finish line of harmony and productivity, right? We want to be big enough to give for that flow, calm environment, and privacy. We want feeding that works with dominance, not against it. Fighting it's not going to help you. You have to work with it and make sure you can mitigate it. And a design that's rooted in how pigs actually behave, right? I again see it over and over again. People design a piece of equipment, say this will work great, plop it in a pen. It's irrelevant. You need to actually go the other way and say how are those pigs going to behave, and then find what fits there, right? A wrap up and takeaway, pretty straightforward. Sow behavior isn't a problem. It's a blueprint for how to do it. You got to understand it and then follow that guideline. Our pen design is by far your best tool for welfare and productivity. If we do that right, we can do a lot of other things. And the large pens with the ESF, it's the most forgiving, flexible option. Hands down, we can genuinely get you the best welfare and best production out of that style of a barn, right? And then let the pigs be pigs. Just give them the space and structure to do it, and look at that. You got harmony as possible. Just give them the feed and right space. Away you go. And that brings me to the end. So thank you so much for listening. And if you have any questions or you want to contact me, my contact information is at the bottom there. Thanks again for the opportunity.